Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. Joseph Parker scrapes by the skin of his teeth to get a split decision win over Derek Chisora in Manchester. And he overcame a first round knockdown. And not just first round, it was in the first 10 seconds. See here on screen, took a big punch, 2:53 of the first round to go, and he goes down. So that was a horrible start. The commentators actually thought he must have got sort of caught up on the ropes or something. But no, clean punch, Parker goes down. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of feeling about this result because this was a fight. It was a tale of two halves. And the scoring, the judges' scorecards, we'll get to them, 115, 113, 115, 113, 116, 111. We'll come back and circle back to that 116, 111 a little bit later on. The other two cards, they're more reflective of the fight. But certainly Derek Chisora, given what he did in the first 6 rounds with the knockdown, he will count himself unlucky, and he made some comments to that effect after the fight. We'll get to his comments a little bit later on. But Joseph Parker, I wasn't sure he'd done enough to win this fight because it was certainly in the balance, and he needed basically to sweep most of, if not all of the rounds in the second half of the fight. And he went about doing that, but it wasn't so conclusive in some of those rounds that you sort of thought he was dominating. Chisora from about round 5 was really starting to tire, but we'll start from the top of the fight because Chisora was really implementing his game plan well. He was coming forward. He was obviously having success pretty much from the get-go, getting that knockdown. And his right hands were landing. They were finding the target. He was having a lot of success in the early rounds. But a feature of this fight from Derek Chisora, which I thought it could pay dividends, and I think to some extent it did later in the fight. I think even though Parker was looking fresher than Chisora later on, I think the work that Chisora did to the body early on was very good, and it took a toll ultimately in the sort of championship rounds. So there was the WBO Intercontinental title on the line for this, and Joseph Parker needed to win this fight. He needed to have a good performance. He needed to get the W and move on. He gets the W, but certainly people will be debating the performance, and there's a few different elements to sort of unpack and tease out. Obviously the relationship with Andy Lee, but we'll quickly work through the rest of the action. Just very briefly, broad strokes, but through the first 5 rounds, I had Chisora up 4-1. I thought that the work he was doing was better. He was outlanding, outworking, and basically outmaneuvering Joseph Parker. He was having his fight, making Parker work, putting the pressure on, effective pressure, and landing overall the better shots. Save for round 4, though, I thought Joseph Parker started to really get on his jab, started to work his way into the fight in that round, and I thought he probably did enough to nick it, but again, it was a very close round, an even round, and that will be one of those rounds where I think some people will have some debate about, well, what happened? Did he actually win that one? Because there is a couple of rounds in here that, they were close, and you turn them around the other way, it's a Chisora victory. Heading into that final round, I was unsure, and there are a couple of moments in the 11th and the 12th where Parker could have put the hammer down, but just for whatever reason, and possibly exhaustion, I don't know. Maybe it's a lack of killer instinct. I've seen some people online sort of going on about that. But yeah, from about round 5, Derek Chisora, you could see visibly starting to tire. I gave him that round, but after that, it started to be pretty much all Parker, but not so much that he was dominating Chisora to the point where he was hurting him repeatedly and all the time. It was another sort of, in some regards, a classic Joseph Parker sort of fight. Through the mid-rounds, he does tend to go off and start circling, jab, jab, right hand, that sort of stuff. I think there was a bit more ambition in these mid-rounds maybe compared to normal, but there was certainly an element of energy saving that he was implementing, but it was just he was getting the better slightly of a lot of these rounds and landing. At times there were some flashy combinations, sort of left hook, right hand, and he was winning those rounds on my card. And it's, I guess, ahead of the fight, I said the winning of this fight, because I said I thought this was going to be a Parker win by decision, but the winning of it was going to come down to these rounds, because we knew Derek Chisora was going to come out fast, let his hands go, look for the right hand, that sort of looping overhand right, which he is successful with and was successful with in this fight. But he really faded quite badly, and there were some rounds where he just really wasn't doing a lot, wasn't doing enough, even though Parker wasn't necessarily himself really going gangbusters. Joseph Parker was doing enough to get those rounds in the bank and obviously come back into the fight, and so much so that obviously the judges probably, and I haven't seen the scores myself in terms of those rounds, he probably won most of the rounds in the second half of the fight. But there were moments towards the end of the fight where, Chisora was fading so badly and Parker was getting the best of the action, and he just took his foot off the gas, and you're like, what are you doing? In round 11, he seemingly was putting it on Chisora, having him hurt, and he just had him on the ropes, but took his foot off the gas, backed up, and allowed Chisora to get some rest. It was really bizarre, for me at least, in the 11th round, that Chisora seemingly on the racket points, not so much so that he was ready to go, but Parker had him in some spots of trouble and just took their foot off the accelerator. I tweeted about it. I said it was just bizarre. He had the opportunity to do more, but he wasn't doing enough. And in the 12th round, he seemingly had Chisora almost ready to go, backed him up onto the ropes with some heavy shots, and you sort of thought if he really puts it on Chisora now, he might be able to score a knockdown, maybe even get to a finish, but he backs up and basically stares at Chisora, allows Chisora, who was, I think, in a spot of bother, to recover. Chisora comes back into the round, lands a few decent shots of his own, but it was a missed opportunity. And I said on Twitter, if Parker loses this fight, round 11, round 12, where he had the opportunity to really put it on Chisora, that would have been key in it. So it's going to be interesting to see some of the judges' scorecards, because those latter rounds, most of them, if not all, must have gone to Joseph Parker, given the slow start. And he was, a round down with the knockdown as well. You have to remember that. I mean, I had Chisora, as I say, 4-1 up after 5 rounds, and I gave Parker most of the remaining rounds. But round 12 was a very even round, and it could have, and I thought it was going to be in the balance type of thing, but apparently not. So, especially for that guy, 116, 111, what is that guy smoking? But if you look at the scorecards, 115, 113, I'm doing the maths in my head. I'm going, does that actually work out? Were there some even rounds thrown in there somewhere? Because to me, I can't work that out. But also 116, 111, we have to address that. Absolutely terrible. That gives Chisora, 3 rounds in the fight? I mean, what sort of fight was he watching? That's absolutely ridiculous. I think just off the first half a dozen rounds alone, Chisora had to be up, especially with the knockdown too. I mean, it beggars belief. That guy, I don't know what sort of fight he was watching, and it's one of those things that does sour the sort of fight to some extent, hearing that. But when they were reading it out and it was a split decision, I didn't know which way it was going to go, because it was a close fight. And I know some people are going to scream robbery. I'm not going to go that far, but I wasn't certain that Joseph Parker was going to get the decision. I had it razor thin. It came down basically who was going to win that 12th round for me, because Parker worked his way all the way back in the second half of the fight. And Derek Chisora obviously had faded pretty badly, but if people remember that final round, he landed, I think, 3 really eye-catching right hands earlier in that round, and he had a little bit more success towards the tail end of the fight. Some of the things that I guess we should cover with Joseph Parker. Some of it, I think there were some improvements under Andy Lee. There were certainly some straighter punches, but you have to ask the question about his gas tank, because there were certainly some rounds where he needed to do more. Maybe the judges didn't see it that way, but looking at the fight, I was thinking he needs to put the hammer down, really push the advantage. And I thought if he was, heading into that 11th round, he needed to really be dominant. And he was to some extent, but he just let him off the hook. And I thought, why are you doing that? And I think some of that comes down to the fitness, and there was fatigue creeping in. And I thought Chisora was able to, at least in the first part of the fight, implemented his game plan well. Parker was fighting his fight, and Parker doesn't necessarily like being roughed up, and he doesn't necessarily have a terrific inside game, but I do think we did see some improvement from Parker, having worked with Andy Lee in some of the infighting. There were some nice combinations landed, but still a little bit too much holding and hugging for me. Sometimes Parker relents and just sort of falls in and ties up. And I did think his defense as well, sometimes a little bit leaky. The hands were low and he was getting caught by the right hand, and also guilty of circling right into the right hand of Derek Chisora through different spots in the fight. Chisora will take that all day if you give it to him. And I did wonder, Joseph Parker, as he lost a little bit in his hand speed. We only saw sort of moments of, really sort of typical Parker hand speed. It was fleeting. There were just, the odd moment, a fast combination. But he didn't look particularly quick on his feet. His hands didn't necessarily look that fast at times. The jab, it was sort of holstered for large amounts of the fight, but when he was throwing it and consistently, he was having success. But I think Derek Chisora, so after the fight, he said that he was very upset. He said, they just don't want to let me win. He said, this is the treatment that I get from boxing. They don't like me. And Joseph Parker actually said to him, let's do the rematch. And it wasn't just once, it was multiple times. And Chisora said he'll take the rematch. Andy Lee, Parker's new coach, he said, let's do the rematch straight away. So seemingly they might run this one back. And given how close it was, yeah, I don't mind seeing it again. But I think out of the two, I think definitely Joseph Parker has some things that he can work on, improve on. And I think there's probably more upside in Parker having a better second fight than the first one. He just got off to such a slow start, and obviously getting dropped in that first round certainly didn't help matters. And I think he, the scorecards and getting the split decision, it was, I think he can count himself lucky. One judge obviously had it for Chisora, 115, 113. But Joseph Parker, he said it was a fight that it was very tough. Chisora was a very hard and game opponent, and he wants to move on and have some big fights here in the heavyweight division. But you have to question, after, I don't want to say going life and death, but some people will say that it is that. Where is Joseph Parker right now? Where's his stock after this fight? It was a better performance than the Junior Farr fight, but it was far from a masterclass either. And based off that, is he a top 10 fighter? I'm not sure. I don't have Chisora as a top 10 fighter. I have him as being a very tough and durable and solid sort of gatekeeper to the world level. But I have him somewhere towards the back end around the teens, about 20 or so. And Joseph Parker didn't necessarily show me so much to go, you're necessarily a cut above this. They looked somewhat on the same level. I mean, let's be honest about it. A win is a win, though, after all. And I guess congratulations to Joseph Parker. He moves on. He'll sort of maintain his position within sanctioning bodies. But you've got to feel for Derek Chisora as well, because obviously he thought he did enough. And, I thought he had a really good performance, at least certainly in that first part of the fight. And that may have been enough. But that's boxing. What did you make of that? What did you make of the performance by Parker? Did you see lots of improvement, or what were you expecting out of this new relationship with Andy Lee? I mean, they seemed to work well together, and Parker was certainly responding better to the instruction in the second half of the fight, but seemingly unable to really handle and deal with the pressure well early on. We knew it was going to be sort of like that, but Parker was struggling at times. But drop a comment, loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.